The U.S. has now surpassed all other countries in the number of coronavirus cases, and health experts are estimating the peak may still be weeks away. 51 Italian doctors who tested positive for coronavirus have died, according to the Italian Association of Doctors. The New York Police Department has nearly 700 positive coronavirus cases. About 12% of the workforce is out sick. A 33-year-old member of Louisiana Governor John Bel Edwards' staff, April Dunn, has died from COVID-19, and President Trump has called on baseball player Alex Rodriguez for help with the virus response. Never in the United States history has the nation confronted a great crisis with its president paralyzed by narcissistic personality disorder, somebody wrote today. 219 days until the presidential election. This episode of Stand Up with Pete Dominick dropped Monday, March 30th, 2020. Everything seems crazy, and what, if anything, are we going to learn from it? Hello and welcome to Stand Up. My name is Pete Dominick. This is a show about important issues that matter to you, your family, your community, your country, and your planet. That's what I've always done, and I've always brought experts on to help me do it. Today, joining me, Dr. Prakash Gatta, who is a friend and listener of mine for years. He is a general surgeon in Washington State who also got the coronavirus. That's right. Him, his wife, and his kids got it. Who better to talk to than an actual physician who also got sick? Also joining me today, Boston Globe columnist, author Michael Cohen, to talk about all the politics surrounding this and why Republicans just can't seem to understand how to run a government, mainly partly because they hate government. I hope you had a good weekend. I have been keeping really busy. I think that is the answer to fighting your fears and your anxieties, your depressions, and your concerns, is to keep as busy as you can with your mind, but also make sure you have time to meditate, close your eyes, take a few breaths as well. I spent the weekend working outside as much as I could, getting the garden ready, cleaning up the house. I'm moving my garage, everything in my garage, into my shed, and hopefully turning the garage into like a TV studio. Friday night, got together with a whole bunch of my friends on Patreon, paid subscribers, and I think it was, was it 30, 40 of you that joined me? It was fun. Friday night at 9 o'clock. We'll try to do that again this week. People seem to get a good distraction out of it. My dad joined us and entertained everybody. That was a lot of fun. If you're not a paid subscriber, we're almost to 500 paid subscribers. For as little as $5 a month, you can help sustain this podcast, which is now every day right here, wherever you're getting your podcasts. And I'm sharing a whole bunch of the videos on youtube.com/standupwithpete. Please subscribe to that YouTube page, subscribe to this podcast, give it a rating, sign up for a paid subscription at patreon.com/Pete Dominick, or click on the paid subscription highlighted in the show notes, or just go to PeteDominick.com. And let's get to the show by talking about the heroes, everybody. The heroes are who? The healthcare workers. Of course, I, like most of you, are probably thinking a lot about those who are on the front lines, healthcare workers. Many of you have loved ones, spouses, partners, or you yourself are headed into what I think it's fair to say compares to combat. I tweeted yesterday, it shouldn't be controversial to think of frontline healthcare workers just as we have combat veterans. If you're working in a healthcare facility, you are a hero and should be seen as such. What say you? Hashtag healthcare heroes, hashtag healthcare workers, hashtag PPE shortage. I know I'm a kiss ass. Somebody tweeted in response, but I think all of us are trying to keep those folks who are actually doing something really dangerous and really important, saving the rest of our lives, in the front of our minds. So like anybody else, I want to acknowledge them. And around the world, citizens have been applauding healthcare workers as they change shifts. And NBC Nightly News production team put together a montage video. Here is sound of folks around the world applauding healthcare workers as they change shifts. This is in Spain. A street in Lyon, France. This is back to Spain, Madrid. Vancouver, Canada. All right, and that was thanks to NBC Nightly News for the audio on that. One person replying to my tweet said healthcare workers are on the front lines and should be seen as heroes, but let's also give some respect to grocery workers like my son and other people in retail are dealing with the crowds and nastiness from people when something's not in stock. Yeah, that's another group of people who is brave to be out there, number one, working, and just having the patience to have to deal with customers who are terrified and anxious and impatient and, well, American. But, you know, I think you still, if we are ranking them, and I don't know if it matters or not, if you're a healthcare worker and you're working with people who are suspicious to have or do have been confirmed to have COVID-19, then, you know, that's braver, I'll argue, than almost any other job. And in responses to my tweet and this conversation, one person said, and just in terms of comparing healthcare workers to combat veterans, at Gunpacking Lib writes, tweets, I've served in combat. I would prefer to face rocket attacks in Afghanistan versus an invisible virus because at least we got a 10 to 15 second warning before they hit us. Nick D writes, yes, but what makes it doubly hard is that they can bring the battlefield home with them. Their families are put at greater risk because of the work they do. And many, for instance, orderlies and nurses' assistants in nursing homes are paid so little. And lastly, on this, at Jollyman72 tweets, in spirit, Pete, I agree, but most medical personnel are adults who have years of training and education before being thrown into service. The military is a factory that churns out mostly poor and little educated kids into combat after a few months of being yelled at and mind fucked. Same? Question mark. Okay, fair enough. Oh, finally, I just saw this tweet in relation to this conversation. I don't know who wrote this, but they tweeted, my partner, the doctor, rolling her eyes. Tell them I don't want their claps and cheers during a pandemic. I want them to stop voting like dummies for sociopaths who don't want them to have decent healthcare systems at all in the first place. And speaking of healthcare workers, on Saturday night, I got a direct message from my friend, Dr. Prakash Gatta, who is a surgeon out in Washington, who also contracted the coronavirus, COVID-19. Yeah, he got it. His wife got it. He thinks his kids got it. So we had a conversation because I thought, who better to talk to about all of this than a doctor who has actually gotten sick. Here it is right now on Stand Up.
Yeah, baby. Oh, yeah.
Crazy.
All right. I'm recording, and you are you're an MD, you're a general surgeon, specialist in Tacoma, Washington. You've been practicing 13 years. You specialize in general surgery. You're an experienced board-certified surgeon. You primarily work with patients with stomach, intestine, and other digestive issues that require surgical treatment, and now you yourself are a patient because you caught the COVID. Is that right, Prakash?
All correct, and thank you for Googling me before you call me.
Dr. Prakash Gatta and I have been talking for years, but this is the first time we've talked face-to-face via camera.
Yeah.
Handsome man.
I'm greatly honored that you were able to find some time to talk to me. So one of the reasons I connected with you is because you have a national audience, and I think the message which I think you could help me with is the fact that everybody knows the statistics, but to connect with somebody who has had the disease, has gotten better, and is able to get back to work. I've been trying to figure out our own hospital system's healthcare policy that would allow me to return to work. I think it's an important message to give from a morale perspective to our healthcare workers, because last week, before I knew I had COVID-19, I had all this anxiety because I was self-isolating because I had the symptoms. I was waiting on my test results, which took 5 to 6 days, which is kind of insane. And in that period of time, I was like, there's no way I'm going to have this disease. I'm going to have to go back to work next week. I'm going to have to face patients. All this anxiety is like, before you go into of your audience who has been into battle, who served the military, who know that there's nervous energy before you go into battle. You're doing your duty. I've never felt that before. And for me to have that feeling, that sensation that, look, I'm actually going to go do my duty. I'm going to do my job, but it could hurt me, could hurt my family. I could get killed. There's a lot of young people. And the thing that really adds to the anxiety amongst healthcare workers is the virus is something nobody really knows about. We're learning about it every few minutes, every few days, there's new reports. And the ways the healthcare system across the globe has responded is just amazing to watch. So, which means a month ago, when the Chinese were getting beaten down, they were able to get publications submitted, which has helped us today to be able to fight the disease. Here's the bottom line. The reason healthcare workers are anxious are because there's too many people coming in with no prior healthcare, no prior comorbidities or diseases, 30, 40 years old, coming in on death's door because they felt they could handle this. And within minutes getting intubated, which is the breathing tube going down, getting connected to the ventilator. And the reason you would do that is because the patients are coming in really sick. And if you don't intubate them, they're going to die. Secondly, when you intubate them, you're creating something called a closed circuit, which means the breathing tube goes down into the lungs. All of the virus that is what we call aerosolized, the droplet infection, is now within a controlled setting. So it actually helps protect other healthcare workers from contracting the disease.
Meaning it's because the intubation, it's
correct.
The virus is down inside of you because you're not.
Right. So if you think of
out.
where the virus sits, it's so the people who get sick are people coming in with what's called a lower respiratory infection. Mm-hmm. Now, if you got sick or I got sick, most of us, 83 to 85% of patients would have something called upper respiratory infection, which is cold cough, sneezing, not even sneezing, fevers. It's more like the flu, right? The people who die or get sick are the ones who have a lower respiratory infection, which is otherwise known commonly as the pneumonia. So the patients coming in with pneumonias, our body's own immune response, especially in adults, creates such a severe response that it damages the lungs, and it creates a condition called acute respiratory distress syndrome, ARDS. And it is the acute respiratory distress syndrome and the associated immune response that the body generates is what's killing patients. So you're coming in with a combination, you're fighting the infection, and your own immune response is over-responding potentially and creating septicemia, sepsis, and patients are coming in dying after being on the ventilator for 3 to 4 weeks and then ultimately succumbing to some secondary disease like renal failure or heart disease like myocarditis. It's just unthinkable that young people are coming in with this disease process and that just some of them are just not coming out. So when you look at the details of what the virus can do, that is the reason the healthcare workers are freaked out, because it is something that could literally kill you.
Tell me about you yourself. When did you get sick and how sick did you get and how long? And also, what about your wife and kids?
Yeah, great. Thanks for asking. So I think I got sick around the 15th or the 16th of March. The 15th of March was my birthday, so I remember that. And then, the symptoms persisted for several days before I was able to get a chance to get tested. And my wife got sick ahead of me. And the best way to describe it is like the worst, probably one of the worst flus we've ever had. There's some people with worse symptoms, some with better.
What were your symptoms? What were hers?
So I had no fever, which is supposedly one of the most sensitive signs or indicators of the disease. I had no fever. I don't even think we have a thermometer at home, but it was mostly cough, some of which was productive. So occasional headaches, maybe some sneezing, but we couldn't really. I was very surprised that I tested positive, but I tested myself. I forced myself to get tested because they expanded it to healthcare workers in one of the counties locally, because they didn't want to infect my colleagues and my patients if I got back into work. Right. And the kids got sick before my wife, so we're hopeful that everyone's been through it and passed it, at least in my household.
How bad did it get for the kids? What were their symptoms?
Yeah, I think they were sick. You know, it was like one of the worst flus. They all got their flu shots this year. So it was a little worrisome. Fevers, some cold cough. Thankfully, they pulled through. So it wasn't, it worried me a little bit. I had to get my wife on some antibiotics, which is not typical for her. She never really gets sick. She's a lot healthier and like fitter than me. So we were surprised how it hit us. And then even 2 to 3 weeks out, we still kind of recovering. You know, there's more fatigue than we normally feel, a lot less energy. So it is something. It's not nothing.
But it's different for every single person who gets it,
Correct.
Fair to say?
Yes. It is different, you know, and there are a lot of asymptomatic carriers. One of the theories about why it is, knock on wood, affecting kids less is the kids' immune responses are not fully developed. So if you don't have a full immune response, like maybe children are reacting to the disease differently, and adults are different, it's possible that because of the way the adults are reacting to this virus in their lungs, there's a lot more damage being done to the lungs through our own immune responses as adults. So you're correct that it affects children and adults and within adults differently and older adults differently. So at some point, 5-10 years from now, we'll be writing textbooks about what we're learning today. And we'll learn that this virus affected or harnessed our immune response in such a way that had a very detrimental effect to patients that didn't survive.
So you were saying earlier that this is the first time you've ever felt like going to work is scary, and all these healthcare workers and your colleagues are going in every day, but a lot of them are getting sick as well. I mean, what are your more specific concerns right now for your coworkers, your colleagues, and those that are on the front line, Prakash?
So great question. So the way the news reports that we read are, yes, look at active and new infections in New York City, like let's say, for example. But what's the most concerning for us is there's been 50 doctors and probably times 2 nurses in Italy that have died. And there's a lot more that are going to die. If you look at the breadth of that disease in that country, so out of 10,000 deaths today, 50 or 100 of those are physicians. Now, that might not seem like a huge number, but if you're in a stressful environment and you're dealing with a lot of sick patients, stress affects your immune system. And if you go from patient to patient with a very high viral load, in other words, so these patients are really sick, they're producing a lot of the coronavirus, which in their droplets, you're exposed to a very high level of virus. And under that stressful situation, that stress leaves you more prone to disease. So my colleagues that are having to go to work every day, they can't call out sick, they work 12-hour shifts, nurses, doctors, these people, people who clean the rooms, environmental service people, the EMTs, they have no choice. They can't not go to work, right? They can't work from home. So the fear is, we know we're putting ourselves into a position of harm. We know we're doing that even to our families, but there's no alternative, right? If we don't do it, this is our job. This is our calling. We're doing what we have always been trained to do. And this is something if we survive, that we're going to tell our kids and our grandkids that this is a lesson to be learned. So that fear of that anxiety of, hey, I'm going into something that can potentially hurt me and take my life. That is just not something anyone has experienced before. So it's a new feeling of going into war. It's not the same as someone who's actually going into battle, obviously, but it's the closest I could come to say that I've served this country, if I do what I'm supposed to do.
I think there's a real comparison to be made right there in terms of military combat and healthcare workers that are walking straight into this virus. So you're a general surgeon, so most of your surgeries are, quote, elective,
Right.
And you've been sick, so either way, you haven't been able to work. How long have you been out of work? When do you anticipate going back to work?
So based on our state's Department of Health guidelines, I can technically go back to work tomorrow, which I'm going to try to do. I'll make sure I run it by my work, our employee health. So, and the reason So I'm a surgeon. We've canceled all of our elective surgeries for the last at least 2 weeks or so, which is the hospital policy, which is the right thing to do, and primarily for two reasons. One was to conserve our PPEs. Secondly, to do what we call surge planning, which is Washington State was hit early, so we are ready to be to face the, for that exponential growth of patients. So my role is going to be, so I'm a general surgeon. My fellowship training is in esophageal and robotic surgery, so I do a lot of specialized things, but none of that matters right now. My goal would be to be our second line providers to back up the ER once the ER docs start getting sick. Second thing is the second area where my help will be needed, where I can potentially help, is to do critical care, which is the patients that are sick with COVID or whatever else, needing ventilator support. So I would do what the pulmonologists and the intensivists do, the trauma surgeons do, which is to run these ventilators, run them as in sort of do the tweaking, figure out what setting is working, because it's a very intricate and a very complicated machine with lots of different options based on what patient needs are. So we would all of a sudden change our practices from what we've learned years ago in residency and medical school to become intensive care doctors, to become trauma surgeons, to run these ventilators, because the manpower, the women power, the person power is lacking, and to do anything else we can potentially do. I can tell you that the guy who comes in or the girl who comes in to clean the room that has been used by a COVID patient is probably saving more lives than I could probably save. So these are the unsung heroes of the hospital system that nobody hears from, and they're going in, exposing themselves to the same disease, but doing what they can to help and save lives. So not just of physicians and nurses, but also patients.
So when you go back to work, are you going to wear that mustache like that?
So the reason I got rid of my beard, brother, is because with a beard, you can't get a good seal on that mask. So that was one of the reasons. So my daughter's been giving me crap for this all morning.
What would you say, if anything, in terms of your frustrations with the reaction from local, state, or federal government authorities? What's your big take on that, buddy?
Again, these are great questions. I appreciate asking them. So the thing is, I think Washington State, in a way, as much as we suffered, and the people up in Kirkland with that nursing home where a lot of deaths have come, actually acted us to activate our response a little earlier than New York City, for example. I will tell you the social distancing policy appears to be helping. We talked about flattening that curve. The curve in Washington State appears to have flattened. So I would say from a local and state level, the right decisions have been made. From a hospital system level, our administrators are doing the right thing in terms of conserving PPE. I've had volunteers and neighbors come in, drop off masks and gowns, just an unthinkable response. So I will tell you that, there will be a time for looking for political sort of payback. I know that the time is not now. We have to get over this, but there's a lot of things from a national level that could have been done better. There's no question that the disease wasn't taken seriously. Resources could have been harnessed earlier from a federal level. I think there's a lot in the response today that is I'm thankful for. And there's something that Trump is doing well. I think I'm thankful that he's doing daily press briefings. That actually helps me, even if it's bad news. At least they're not trying to hide the bad news. So supporting our state and local authorities, doing what they're asking, getting the message out, going back to work and helping the morale of my own coworkers would be my job. And I think that I'm thankful for all the people responding and acting responsibly.
Do you think that because you had the virus already and you've worked through it, that you're going to be immune to it when you go back?
I hope so. And one of the things I want to do is we're trying to get this consortium together where people like me, if I'm immune to it, I should be generating something called immunoglobulins, which is a protein which antibodies are basically signs that I've fought the virus and I'm hopefully immune to it. If we're able to pull plasma together from a lot of plasmas, and that's a component of blood, through the people who've had the disease and recovered, we could potentially get some of this immunoglobulin protein together and help the patients who are actively fighting it and are not able to harness that response. So I'm hopeful to donate my own blood for research and for treatment. And I hope I'm immune. There are some case reports about people who are come back positive. This is from China, retested, come back negative, and then they come back positive again. So there is a reinfection rates. The problem is we just don't know. It could not affect me. It could affect me. There's no way to know.
You said to me in a text last night, the next 2 weeks are going to be hell.
Yeah. If you look at the trajectory of ICU beds, the shortage, it varies by state, of course.
What kind of dog do you have?
I'm sorry?
That's a dog, right?
That is a dog.
What kind of dog do you have?
Gunner, come here, buddy.
Gunner?
This is a... this guy is an Australian Labradoodle.
Oh my goodness! Look at him. He's gorgeous. Well, keep him in the frame while you answer this last question, because this last question, this last answer is terrifying about what's gonna, what the next couple weeks are gonna look like. So if you can keep Gunner in the frame, it can kind of soften the blow.
So the next 2 weeks is where all the projections appear to be telling us that we're going to hit peak in most states. Every state is different. Hitting those ICU beds we're going to be short of beds in the next week or 10 days. And this is where that nightmare scenario when an 80-year-old comes in and a 40-year-old comes in at the same time, and we have one ventilator to give, which patient do you pick? This is like a trauma triage war-like situation, which we're never trained to do. We don't have lessons for that in medical school. We're not trained to do the triage. If you're a military person, that might be different. But for someone like us, we're trained to save all lives. We're not that from an ethical standpoint. We have ethical people who are supposed to do that for us, but it's not something that's made at a decision at the ER level. So that's the most concerning.
I'm really happy to talk to you and to see you like this, and I'm glad that you're better and that your whole family's better, and I'm glad that you're going to be able to go back to work and I know save lives. Thank you for talking to me, and let's check in again real soon as you go back to work.
Thanks for this opportunity, and I just want to shout out to all my colleagues and my partners who are doing a lot more than I could ever do, and for people like you who are relaying this message. We really appreciate it.
Dr. Prakash Gatta up there in Tacoma, Washington. You can tweet him at Gatta Surgeon, everybody. GATTASURGEON. That's how you spell surgeon.
That's right.
Okay, that is Prakash Gatta. He is a longtime listener of my show and a guy who I've become pretty friendly with over the years. We DM'd, then we escalated to texting. He used to call the show quite a bit, and I was really worried and concerned when he reached out to me and told me that he had tested positive, and so I'm really just happy to have touched base with him and to have connected with him like that. You can watch the video on my social medias. I may post it at YouTube as well, but I'll definitely post at least some excerpts, especially that part with the morbid part with the dog in the picture. Softens the blow a little bit. All right, now let's go to my second guest for today's episode is Michael Cohen. He's a columnist for the Boston Globe. Always love talking to Michael Cohen. And it's just so sad that his name is Michael Cohen, what with the fact that the president's lawyer was Michael Cohen. Same name, much different guy. I always love reading his column, his newsletter, and his books. And, of course, I love asking him questions. He's a great talker. And, unfortunately, I changed mics here. I tried the lav mic, and it's not just as perfect as this one, but I'm just experimenting for video, so it's mostly him talking. Hopefully, you won't even notice the difference. Here's my conversation with Michael Cohen.
All right, joining me now is Boston Globe columnist. He is an author. His most recent book is Clear and Present Safety, The World Has Never Been Better and Why That Matters to Americans. You can follow him on Twitter at SpeechBoy71 and subscribe to his newsletter, which comes out every Thursday, Truth and Consequences. Michael Cohen is now joining me, and I'm happy to have you, Michael. Thank you very much for being here.
It's great to be here. Thanks for having me.
I want to talk with you about your most recent column at the Boston Globe, which is really timely. It's important. It's titled The Lesson of the Coronavirus Pandemic, Competence Matters. You open it talking about how long Republicans have pledged to take the government out of our lives, to destroy government, and finally put a businessman in charge. Right. How's that going?
Yeah, how's that going so far? I kind of want to go back and find every person that I talked to in 2016 at a Trump rally who told me we need a businessman to shake things up. And I want to give him a stern talking to, because this is what we have with a businessman and a bad businessman, by the way, as president. Just the disastrous response we've seen to this pandemic.
It's, every businessman is not equal. Some CEOs are, in charge. We've seen the president introduce the CEOs of FedEx and Walmart, and they're huge companies. They're multi-state, multinationals. To be fair, to be honest, he was a businessman. It was a boutique real estate agency. He didn't have that many people. It wasn't this giant conglomerate that would give him experience to manage a real big bureaucracy. Fair to say?
But yes, but let me ask you a question. When you go to I don't know, if you're not feeling well and you want to go see like a doctor, you go to see a doctor, right? Not a businessman, not a CEO. And the same idea is that when you elect a president, somebody to run the federal government, you want somebody who has, governing experience, someone who's been in the public sector, someone who understands management, and not just, again, management of a company, but management of a public institution. And, there's this notion in American politics, and has been for a long time, that governing experience is a negative. It's somehow a bad thing if you actually want to be a president or a senator. And I think what you're seeing now is that, people who take governing seriously, the kind of people that you want in charge, most of the time, but certainly in charge during a crisis like this. And it's not just a question of Trump being bad. It's a question of people below him being bad. Right. The people at the agencies that he's staffed with, those people being bad at their jobs. People at the NSC being bad at their job, not preparing for a pandemic. So it's not just a question of that you want somebody in power who actually has been in politics. You want people to know that they actually believe that governing is important and are going to actually make it a priority. This president has not done that, and past Republican presidents have not done that.
Yeah, FDA, CDC, HHS, there's a lot to talk about with each one of these agencies, but you can go way back to the Reagan administration. You talk about Newt Gingrich as well in this piece, which is really a really important piece for people to read, because this idea that government is the problem, not the solution. Michael, we can absolutely debate better government. Better federal government, better local and state government, less bureaucracy, less red tape, fewer regulations. But government still has to be in charge here at the local, state, and federal level. And we're seeing this because of this pandemic. We're seeing exactly why it's so important now more than ever. Why do people hate it so much that we can't have a thoughtful conversation or debate about how to make it work, especially in a crisis like this?
Because we spent 40, 50 years telling the American people that government is a four-letter word, right? We portrayed the idea of the government playing an important role in people's lives as being, almost a clownish notion, right? I mean, Republicans can't even fathom the idea that government has an important role to play. And so because of that, because they don't take government that seriously, they don't take governing very seriously. And I think about stuff like during the Bush administration, W's administration, the response to Hurricane Katrina was such a disaster, in part because the guy in charge of FEMA was a guy who had no experience in public management. He had no experience in crisis management. And we, he
had a lot of experience in Arabian horses, if I'm not mistaken.
Michael
horses. Brownie. Heck of a job, Brownie.
Heck of a job, Brownie. Arabian horses. And that's what happens when you put people in charge who don't have that kind of experience. It's just it's if you don't value it, then you get people who are hacks, people who don't really take the job seriously, people who don't understand how to do it well in times of crisis. I mean, I was just struck by the fact that I'm watching, Biden, one of his top advisors is this guy, Ron Klain, who was his chief of staff. And Ron Klain, was responsible for the response to the Ebola outbreak in 2014, 2015. Now, I feel a lot better with that guy as president, knowing that he gets someone like Ron Klain around who actually knows how to handle a public health crisis. And part of that's because he just takes it more seriously. Democrats tend to take this stuff more seriously. And you see it in the different responses to these kinds of crises from Republican administrations and Democratic administrations.
Now, Democrats aren't free of criticism. You pointed out in this column the horrific rollout by the Obama administration of healthcare.gov.
Right.
But while Obama had Ron Klain, as you mentioned, President Trump has his son-in-law, Jared Kushner, in charge.
I mean, he's got Jared Kushner, who's basically in charge of everything, it seems, and who, I guess, he's the one who wrote the speech he gave from the Oval Office about 2 weeks ago, the one that imposed this, ban on European travel. Kushner is also the guy who told the president that this wasn't a major health issue. It was a public psychology issue. I mean, frankly, we're saying it. These are the mediocrities that are in charge right now. And this is why you have this lousy response. I mean, look at even just at the National Security Council. These guys got rid of the office that dealt with pandemics. They had a whole playbook how to deal with pandemics. They didn't even look at it. When the Ebola outbreak happened in 2014 and 2015, and the H1N1 before that, the Obama administration, people at the NSC, the professional staff there, but also the political appointees knew they had to respond to this. They had experience in responding to crises like this. And you see the difference. You really do see the difference. And so it's not just a question of Trump being terrible, awful, a raging narcissist. It's that he has seated the federal government people who don't take governing seriously and don't think it's important. And when you have that, this is the result we're seeing right now.
And even those who might take governing seriously or are trying to do a good job, you write this in this piece at the Boston Globe, that Trump is surrounded by enablers and yes men is not news, but it's also what is to be expected when you have a president who has never shown any interest in governing the country or a party that views running executive branch as an afterthought. The fact that he's got all of these yes men and women, a few, around him is really scary because they don't want to tell him the truth and haven't maybe even told him the truth about how bad this is going to be. I mean, they're gently pushing back about his stupid Easter go back to work date. Are you kidding me?
I mean, that's the thing. It's a good point. I should have gotten more into it in the piece, but he is surrounded by people who tell him what he wants to hear, not what he needs to hear. He's surrounded by people who stroke his ego. What you want in a president is somebody who surrounds himself with people who know how to do their jobs and who do their jobs not worrying about the politics of it. And you just do not have that in this administration. You didn't have it when W was president. You had it more so, not completely, but more so certainly when Obama was president. And again, this isn't saying Democrats are better than Republicans. It's just the Democrats take this stuff more seriously. They just
you're right. Andrew Cuomo of New York and Gavin Newsom. By the way, I think Andrew Cuomo is traveling inside a television studio. He's always on TV. Gavin Newsom of California. But you say there are exceptions for Republicans like Mike DeWine in Ohio. But unfortunately, Republican governors of Mississippi, Florida, and Texas are following more traditional Republican course of putting politics and partisanship ahead of competence, you write.
I mean, this guy in Florida, DeSantis, right? He leaves the beaches open for weeks, doesn't close them, and now he wants to keep New Yorkers out of Florida. Yeah, that's going to solve the problem, dude. The problem is that you let this guy out of hand because you put politics and, frankly, the economy and tourism dollars ahead of keeping people safe. And this guy in Mississippi, Tate Reeves, who basically is overruling local officials who are trying to keep people at home and maintain social distancing. I mean, these guys are making political decisions. And I give DeWine a lot of credit. I should give Charlie Baker credit in Massachusetts. He's done a good job. Larry Hogan in Maryland. These are Republican governors who have taken this issue seriously. But they are, unfortunately, the exception to the rule. And a lot of Republican governors, frankly, are not taking this seriously for political reasons. And also because I just think they don't have the kind of infrastructure in their own administrations to deal with it.
How do you think these daily press conferences are going? I mean, every day the president comes out, almost every day, different times, and he touts his, how good they are doing. He brags about the success. He's not doing a lot of calming. He's not doing a lot of leading, and he's certainly not doing. He's also doing a lot of straight up lying. And there's some question about whether the network should be covering these press conferences. But what do you make of these daily press conferences? Is there anything good coming out of them?
No. I mean, if I'm being honest, no. I wrote this last week that the network should stop covering these Trump press conferences live because he's saying things that are not true. He's saying things that are, frankly, dangerous. I mean, people have died because they took drugs that he suggested that they take to keep them safe, which will not keep them safe. He's also, he spends half the time trying to promote his own performance, doesn't really put out helpful information to people, and sends out mixed messages. It's supremely unhelpful when you have governors saying, stay at home, don't leave your house, don't go out. And the president of the United States saying, by Easter, we can all get back to normal. It just sends the most dangerous signal. And I think, by the way, that some of the reason why some of these red state governors have been resistant to put in place more stringent measures is because Trump is sort of saying we don't need them, or Trump is suggesting that we all back to work soon. I mean, this kind of mixed messaging is so dangerous, and you see the partisan divide. Democrats who say this is a serious issue, Republicans who are less inclined to think it's a serious issue.
It's hard to pick the most egregious, awful behavior, mistake, or choice the president has made, but it seems to be a pretty bad one when apparently the other day he told Mike Pence not to call that woman back, the governor of Michigan. He didn't like something that she said. He took it personal, and he
took it personal. Really?
And he
whoa.
But it's crazy because you have to wonder what the Trump supporter thinks there, especially the Michigan Trump supporter. Are they happy that he is deciding to ignore and criticize the governor of Michigan? You can take things personally. He insults everybody. He gets insulted. But what about all of the people of Michigan? What about all of the Trump supporters in Michigan? How do you do that? How do you just not call a governor back?
And not even know her name, by the way. And then also apparently not send her vital equipment that she needs for the state's hospitals. Yeah. I was talking to somebody today in Michigan, actually, about another article I'm writing, and she said, look, for a lot of people who don't like Whitmer, who voted against her, that's the governor, Gretchen Whitmer, who voted against her, they probably applaud what Trump is saying because they think, she should be nicer to the president. I mean, it's pathetic. It sort of boggles the mind, but I do think that for some Republican voters, they probably find what he's doing appealing.
What about, in the meantime, Michael, there is a presidential campaign going on. Technically, Bernie Sanders is still in it. Joe Biden has given press conferences every day trying to find his camera in his laptop or wherever he's got. He's got a studio in his office like the rest of us now do. Although I would argue mine is much better. I'm growing plants. But how do you think? Nice, by the way. Thank you. How do you think Joe Biden is handling this?
I mean, as bad as well as could be expected, I suppose. I mean, I think there was some criticism that early on he wasn't visible enough. I think it's hard to get visibility at this point because he's not the story right now. I've seen him do a lot more media. Here's one thing I'll say about Biden that strikes me about him. The thing that I think is most appealing about Joe Biden is his compassion, his empathy. That he is the exact opposite of Trump. And I saw him last night, I think it was with Jake Tapper, I'm not totally sure, talking about people who have lost loved ones and cannot say goodbye to them. And he's able to relate his own experience of not being able to say goodbye to his wife, his first wife, who of course was killed in a car crash, or his daughter was killed. He talked about being there with his son when he died. And, it was sort of a moving thing to listen to him talk about that. And I imagine that if you have lost somebody, there is some comfort you would take from, Biden being able to share his own experience and to say you're not alone in what you're going through. And I think that is the thing that Biden is providing right now that this president is not providing and cannot provide. And I think it's one of the things that people like about Biden. I think one of the reasons why he's going to be the nominee of the Democratic Party. And I want to see more of that, and not just because it's good politically or because it may help him. I care less about that, and more because I personally, as a voter, not as a journalist, as a voter, just as an American, as a human being, I want to see Joe Biden because he actually makes me feel a little bit better when he talks. Even if I don't always agree with him, even if I think sometimes he exaggerates a little bit, I feel better when I hear what he has to say.
Finally, you're there in Brooklyn, and I want to ask about your own situation there. But you've been critical of the mayor, de Blasio, on Twitter at least, at SpeechBoy71. What's going on in New York City, and why are you being critical of the leadership there?
Look, de Blasio was way too late to focus on putting in place social distancing measures. Way too late to close the schools. It waited to the Sunday at 6 o'clock before they close them the next day. And I just think he has been a little bit slow in understanding how serious this crisis is. I'm not saying he's responsible for the fact that New York is the epicenter of the coronavirus pandemic right now in the U.S. I think it's much more to do with just New York being a city with lots of tourists, lots of travelers from around the world. But we were a bit late on this one. And other states, like I look at California, for example. Gavin Newsom was way ahead of the curve on this one. And if you look at where California is right now, they're like 30th in number of cases, 30th out of 50 states. I think, people like DeWine in Ohio, they were much more aggressive in dealing with this issue. De Blasio waited, I think, too long. And, again, it's not his fault that things are as bad as they are here. But I think things would be a little bit better shape if he had dealt with this earlier. And I'll just say from my experience, before the schools were closed, I was walking down the street on Saturday night, and every bar was open, every restaurant was open, and they were crowded. And I remember I actually went out for a drink on Friday night right before this all sort of everything went shut down, and it was amazing to me to see people sitting around in a bar drinking and shaking hands and patting people's shoulder and like as if nothing was going on. And I think part of that is leadership, and you see this, again in the red states. Talked about this earlier. Red states maybe not taking it seriously because the president didn't take it seriously, and then in New York, I think people don't take it as seriously because the mayor doesn't take it as seriously. I think leadership really matters in a crisis like this, and I think de Blasio has not done, frankly, a good enough job.
Have you done a good enough job, Michael Cohen? What have you been up to? I was talking to you the other day. You were out with the dog. We were walking our dogs together, as a matter of fact. How are you doing?
It's been tough, I'll be honest. I'm not the best homeschool teacher ever. My kids are pretty awesome, but they're 6 and 8, and it is a challenge to get them to focus. So, I'm working on it. It's been hard. I mean, you don't see people. You go out, like today I went out for a walk. That's my big activity of the day. I go for a walk with the dog, right? I go out for a walk with my kids, but like I don't really have an opportunity to do see a movie or go to a show. I mean, at some point I haven't gone crazy yet, but I'm getting there.
A couple more weeks.
I will say this: Tiger King on Netflix has been.
Oh yes, we watched last night. I'm finally watching something that seemingly everybody else is watching. But how many episodes are there?
I think there's like 8 or 9 or 10 maybe. I don't know. I'm 3 into it now.
We just watched 1.5. My whole family watched it, and it is.
It's awesome.
It's always going to be the show that we binged during this pandemic. I feel like it's gone viral.
And I'll give one more because I like the show Ozark on Netflix.
Oh, yeah?
I think it's pretty good. And the 3rd season just came out, I guess, on Monday or sometime, or maybe last week sometime. It's great.
All
the
right.
3rd season is really good.
There you go.
So
There's
I recommend that one.
two referrals from Michael Cohen. Thank you, as always, for joining me. We'll try to do this on a weekly basis. We'll talk about your column and anything else going on. Always love to get your take and everything. At SpeechBoy71, follow him on Twitter and read him at the Boston Globe, and subscribe to his weekly newsletter, Truth and Consequences, as well. Thank you, sir.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
All right, that is Michael Cohen of the Boston Globe. Follow him on Twitter at SpeechBoy71. And I want to end the Monday show here with a poem that a listener named Joe sent me. Joe's a great guy, and I see this going around now being credited to Gutpreet Gill, and I think I need some music for this. How about Fish Beach by Michael Nyman? Here we go. I hope this is an inspiring poem. Amongst all the fear and confusion, there's this, a different perspective. There's so much fear, and perhaps rightfully so, about COVID-19. And what if we subscribe to the philosophy that life is always working out for us? That there is an intelligence far greater than humans at work here? That all is interconnected? What if the virus is here to help us, to reset, to remember what is truly important? Reconnecting with family and community. Reducing travel so that the environment, the skies, the air, our lungs all get a break. Parts of China are seeing blue sky and clouds for the first time in forever with the factories being shut down. Working from home rather than commuting to work. Less pollution, more personal time. Reconnecting with family as there is more time at home. An invitation to turn inwards, a deep meditation rather than the usual extroverted going out self-soothe. To reconnect with self. What is really important to me? A reset economically. The working poor, the lack of healthcare access for over 30 million Americans in the U.S., the need for paid sick leave. How hard does one need to work to be able to live, to have a life outside of work? And washing our hands, how did that become a new thing that we needed to remember? But yes, we did. The presence of grace for all. There is a shift underway in our society. What if it is one that is favorable for us? What if this virus is an ally in our evolution? and our remembrance of what it means to be connected, humane, living a simpler life, to be less impactful and more kind to our environment. An offering from my heart this morning, offered as another perspective, another way of relating to this virus, this unfolding, this evolution. It was time for a change. We all knew that. And change has arrived. What if? Gut Preet Gill. That's all I've got for you. I'll talk to you tomorrow here on Stand Up. Please give us a rating, give me a follow, and consider a paid subscription at patreon.com/Pete Dominick. Stay strong, stay safe, and stay in touch. I hope to hear from you. Thanks for listening.